Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for joining. And we're going to be starting in less than a minute. Just let everybody who's joining in, I'm going to let them come in. And then we're going to start. We are really excited. We have an amazing guest today. And we are so excited to hearing from our senator. Okay, I think everybody who is in the waiting room is here. So, welcome all to our next session of Food and Politics. It's really exciting, and we are so honored and lucky to have an outstanding person with us today to speak, Senator Ratna Omidvar. Before I introduce her, I want to do a land acknowledgement. The land we are standing on today is a traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. I also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaties, signed with multiple Mississauga and Chippewa bands. We are mindful of broken covenants, and we strive to make this right with the land and with each other. We are all treaty people. Many of us have come here as settlers, immigrants, newcomers in this generation or generations past. I would like to also acknowledge those of us who came here forcibly, particularly as a result of the transatlantic slave trade. Therefore, I honor and pay tribute to the ancestors of African origin and descent. So today we're going to have a chat, as I mentioned, with Senator Omidvar. Senator Omidvar is an internationally recognized voice on migration, diversity, and inclusion. In April 2016, Senator Omidvar was appointed to the Senate of Canada as an independent senator representing Ontario. As a member of the Senate's Independent Senators Group, she holds a leadership position as liaison. Senator Omidvar also served as deputy chair of a special Senate committee and on the charitable sector. Senator Omidvar, welcome to our conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. I have a long, somewhat fading in memory, but I have a connection with Meal Exchange because I knew the founder, Rahul Raj, quite well. And this was when I was running a private foundation, and we helped the startup in different ways. So I'm glad to see you're a thriving organization. It's always lovely to speak to young people because I know this is trite, but young people are the future. And so it's a privilege really to be here with you. Thank you.
That is so amazing, Senator. I think one thing that a lot of people in Canada, and I'm sure a lot of students around here who's listening to us, always try to find out and is what is the roles and responsibilities of a senator?
Okay, so I'll give you the technical answer, and I'll give you a personal answer to that. So the technical answer is that nothing can become law in Canada without passing through the Senate so that the Senate can apply what we call sober second thought. Often what happens in the House of Commons, in fact, too often, what happens in the House of Commons is rabidly political, and legislation is put before us that maybe, it may infringe on constitutional rights, it may infringe on charter rights, and it is our role to make sure that all the dots are crossed and the T's are crossed, and that there are no charter violations, or that the rights of minorities in particular are protected. That's a big part of what we do. So when we look at any piece of legislation, we sort of look at it from the point of view is who's going to be disadvantaged through this piece of legislation. That's a big subject, and we take it seriously. And because we're apolitical, at least I am, the Senate has become less political with the independence of the senators that the Prime Minister has started. But it is still very much a house of debate and argument and compromise and consensus in the end. We often pass bills, we know they're not perfect, but we pass them and we point out to the House of Commons, you have to watch out for these things, and we point them out. But there's something else that we do that is actually, I think, also equally important, and that is Senate studies. We often pick a subject, like the charity subject. The Senate had never done a study on the charitable sector. And so we did a year-long study on it, and we made 42 recommendations. And these recommendations often create the basis or the foundation for legislative amendments. So as a result of that study, in fact, I have put forward a bill that passed in the Senate that realizes one of the important recommendations, which you may be interested in. We'll get to that later. So, sober second thought on legislation, studies, private member bills, which is, not a bill that is coming from the government, but a bill that is coming from an individual senator. And there have been wonderful examples of legislation that originated with the germ of an idea in the Senate, such as the Magnitsky Law, which we all know started in the Senate. And I have tabled a bill in the Senate to take Magnitsky one step further. Why should we just freeze the assets of corrupt foreign officials who are kleptocrats, who are, directly or indirectly responsible for mass forced displacement? Why should we just simply freeze them? Let's seize them and reallocate them back to the people who suffered the most. Now, this is a grand idea. It sounds wonderful, but there are many. Legislation is full of potholes. So that, and I'm very true to my values. I didn't become a different person because I became a senator. I think it's important to stay true to your values. And my values have always been values of inclusion, social justice. And I bring those values to everything I do in the Senate. So I apply that lens. So hopefully that helps you understand to some extent what I do as a senator.
That's absolutely awesome. It certainly gives us a good view on the role of senators in Canada. I think this has been a big question in a lot of people's mind.
Yep.
This is amazing. Thank you.
Yeah. The value of the Senate is not appropriately understood or appreciated, I would say, by Canadians, because it was a scandal-ridden organized institution some years ago. But the truth of the matter is we need a working Senate to pass legislation. And so let's have good senators do their job. That's the bottom result of this.
That's so amazing to hear. So, Senator, in many campus environments, and as we are always talking about post-secondary food and campuses, in many campus environments, there are grassroots student-led food banks that operate as nonprofit organizations. We know you played a major role in Bill S-222, the Effective and Accountable Charitable Act. These campus food banks don't have the opportunity to apply to further government funding because they don't have charity status, as it is too complicated and expensive of a process for students to apply for and keep up with. How can the CRA or the Government of Canada make this process easier on student-led organizations or even grassroots organizations? Is there an opportunity to create other methods of funding for these student organizations? Any idea on that?
So let me actually bust a myth here. You do not need charitable status to apply for government funding. You can apply for government funding as a not-for-profit, as a social enterprise, as a co-op. You can also apply for government funding as a business, right? What you cannot apply for as a not-for-profit is charitable funding, which comes from charitably exempt dollars. You cannot apply for that because you do not have charitable status, okay? And my Bill S-22, closes the gap that exists between not-for-profits and charities, because at this point, charities are mostly obliged to spend charitable dollars on charitable activities that they conduct themselves. So the Food Bank of Toronto, for instance, taking an example from your domain, is a charity. It receives charitable dollars, and for the most part, it must spend it on its own activities. But even the Food Bank of Toronto, there comes a time when it is best advised to work with another group that may not be a charity. Let's say it wants to reach the Jamaican population. I'm just making this up. And the Jamaican population in Toronto is represented not by a charity, because we'll get to why you shouldn't apply for charitable status, but it is connected to the people. Now, the only way the Food Bank in Toronto could work with the Jamaican not-for-profit is to exercise direction and control over them. That is the wording in the CRA regulations. And as you can imagine, it is pretty offensive wording, and it has real teeth in it. So the relationship between the charity and the not-for-profit is controlled entirely by the charity. The intellectual property of the project, in this case, the Jamaican project and the Food Bank project, would not belong to the Jamaican community organization. It would belong to the Food Bank, and the charity, in this case, the Food Bank, has authority over all legal agreements, all intellectual properties, all press releases. And you can imagine how oppressive that is. And this makes the charitable space very difficult for equity right-seeking groups to access, especially Indigenous groups and racial justice groups. So my bill takes away this requirement that charities can only work with non-charities in this way. And there is a reason, and you're students, so I hope you're interested. What's the policy rationale for the law? Well, the policy rationale for the law is accountability. Canadians want accountability for charitably exempt tax dollars, but I don't think Canadians want to oppress and colonize them. And that's a strong word to use, but that is exactly the word that is used in the international domain when Canadian charities are directing and controlling local groups in the developing South. So this bill, if it is passed into law, will collapse that space, but not collapse accountability. And that is the purpose of my law. Now, I want to come to a point when you say your organizations don't have charitable status. I would advise you not to get charitable status. Your students, you should, I admire the activism of students doing, poverty relief work, food security work. This is really important, but you would be distracted beyond your limits if you became charities. Preserve your not-for-profit status and push this law, back me on this, and that's the way you get over this.
That's amazing. So, Senator, just to follow up on this, how can the students who are listening to this really back you up on this law? What is the way to go?
Well, students are savvier than me on social media. Just get on social media and say, I support S222. Hashtag me, hashtag Canadian Federation of Students, hashtag, oh gosh, I don't even know these words. You know these words. So I would say use your social media savvy to amplify the message. And it has to be amplified, especially during the election, because we need all parties to listen to this, and we need them all to embrace it.
Thank you very much. For all the students who are listening, now Anne is going to look at the recording. You know what to do on this front. So the next question, Senator, is focusing on international students a little bit. So international students contribute significantly to our economy in Canada, and we heavily rely on them to fund our institutions, but they do not receive adequate government support here compared to domestic students. For example, international students are not eligible for opportunities under Canada's summer jobs, despite the great contributions. In contrast, Finland, for example, provides equal support to all post-secondary students and equitable access to opportunities and other resources. How can we better support our international students to continue growing the roots they have built here in Canada?
Okay, so international students are an incredibly important constituency for the future of Canada and the present. They contribute $22 billion to our economy, $22 billion. So every time you talk about international students, make sure you talk about $22 billion. The economies of whole small towns in Atlantic Canada, for instance, are running simply because of international foreign students. So this comes home to Canadians and Canadian politicians in real ways. The other lever you have is international students will make are the most attractive potential immigrants. I mean, it makes complete sense. They speak English, they've been educated here, they meet our standards. Let's give them entry to Canada before, and they're young, by the way. They will hopefully marry, hopefully have many babies, and that's what keeps the engine going, our demographic engine going. We got to pay attention to that. So they, the system needs to understand the far-reaching potential impact of international foreign students in Canada. And yes, I agree with you entirely. We can and should do better. One of the things that we should certainly do is expand access to summer employment opportunities, whether it is through summer jobs or other. I don't know the details of that. So I think that is important. And I would suggest that some kind of lobbying brief be put together by the Canadian Federation of Students and you and others who sort of pull, because this is the way you make law. I cannot make any law without the backing of stakeholders. So if this is important to you, develop a policy brief, get the facts, get the figures, we can, people can think about it, and then you make a proposal. If you have a lobby day on the Hill, you make a proposal to legislators. Why don't we do this? If international students are working in summer jobs, this is how they will contribute to the economy. You will get pushback. What about Canadian students who don't have summer jobs? Okay, you got to be prepared for that. There's always pros and cons to political action. So I think that is important. But I'm particularly anxious to open up settlement services to international foreign students, because so many of them will become permanent residents and then citizens. And right now, they are barred from accessing settlement services. So I'd like to make that change as well. It's a small change. I believe the government may be friendly to it because of the enormous contribution of international foreign students to our economy. And frankly, the international student context props up our institutions. I mean, I've spoken countless times to Paul Davis, who, they've pointed out to us how universities all over the country are hurting because there are no international students who've chosen to stay away because of the COVID crisis. So as an outcome of this crisis, as a tiny little silver lining on the cloud, you may actually have reached a tipping point where universities are prepared to take action with you. You need their backing on this. You need their backing. I mean, just look at how politicians have enabled certain groups of people to arrive in Canada. International foreign students have been allowed to travel into Canada. Permanent residents with visas for landing have not been allowed to enter into Canada, but international foreign students have been allowed to get into Canada. That gives you an inkling of the political weight of this discussion.
Exactly, Senator. We were in our last session, we were talking to a member of parliament from Danforth, Julie Debruson, and she mentioned how the province of Ontario was asking the federal government to close all the borders. And when the Prime Minister's office says, okay, can we stop the students? And immediately the government back said, no, let's think about it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, your power has been disclosed in a way.
That's amazing. That's really good to hear. I think the next question, Kayla has a question for you. Senator Kayla from CFS. Kayla, do you want to take it over?
Great, thank you. I also just want to say thank you so much for speaking with us today. I've taken a lot of notes, so this is an amazing opportunity. So my name is Kayla Weiler. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm from the Canadian Federation of Students, where we represent 530,000 students in Canada, and I'm the Ontario representative. So my question is that international students have a lot of concerns and worries about applying for their permanent residency status post their graduation. Some of the PR requirements are extremely difficult and almost impossible to meet. So how can the requirements be changed and streamlined so that international students can be supported in the PR application process?
Okay, that's a pretty specific question. I'm happy to take that question and get the minister to answer it. I should warn you that my battery is running low. Oh my gosh, I'm having lots of issues today and I'm on the phone, but hopefully we can complete this conversation before it completely runs out. So international foreign students and applications for permanent residency, there are so many streams of and so many pilot programs. So right now, for instance, international foreign students have the ability to apply for permanent residency with less qualifying criteria around years of work, etc. So I think, in fact, because I work so much with migrant workers as well, international foreign students are fairly privileged in this scenario. I'm not suggesting that it's not easy. It's not, and it is expensive. I understand that, but the entire system is built on a cost recovery model, and so that's something to look into, whether the costs actually are cost recovery or cost recovery plus. In certain cases, it's cost recovery plus, and that's not fair. And certainly, it is very complex. I would sort of almost suggest that your international students group should sort of pull together and get some access to legal aid in your application process, or even to legal counsel if you can go that far. Imagine having one legal counselor attached to your organization to provide that kind of advice to students, because often students will, and it's not just students, it's everybody, somehow or the other, they will be advised by an immigration consultant or something, and they go down a pathway, or even a lawyer. I don't want to make a distinction there, but good advice, good solid legal advice is important, and that will reduce costs. Now, as to the cost itself, I think you could make an argument that international students will more than pay back any discounts and fees. I would consider a loan program, but forgiving costs entirely or reducing them, when migrant workers have to pay and caregivers have to pay, I'm not sure I would be in favor of a niche approach for international students alone. My sense of basic fairness won't allow me to do that. Hello?
That's a fair answer, Senator. Thank you very much. Our next question is from Stephanie from USA. Stephanie?
Hi, my name's Steph, and I use she, her pronouns, but also they, them pronouns, and I'm representing the Ontario Undergraduate Student Alliance, which represents around 150 undergraduate students across Ontario. Thanks again for coming to speak to us. I know that it's been a difficult day for you, so yes, we definitely do appreciate it. So students are often in a unique state of financial precarity due to both the expensive nature of funding their education and their reduced capacity to earn income while meeting academic demands. This often forces students to compromise their spending on food by either skipping meals or sacrificing, say, nutritious food that they could be consuming. So with COVID-19, there's been sort of additional financial stress on students because of limited employment opportunities, insufficient financial aid, further exacerbating these concerns. Our question for you is, how do you feel this issue could be addressed in a holistic way that considers both the roles financial stress and the normalization of student poverty play in this phenomena?
That's a big question. There are many sides to this question. And, I would say to you that students are subsidized quite heavily because the cost of education is subsidized by the government. If you compare the cost of student fees for a domestic student versus an international student, the difference is really what students are being subsidized with. And there's another consideration that university graduates, undergrads and graduates, and I'm sure there is some nuance to this, have generally a better opportunity for labor market mobility because they've got the education. So there's an assumption that it will pay off in the long term. Now, I know that doesn't help you with the question, and I wonder if you could think about a student basic income. There's a lot of talk about basic income in Canada, and I'm not sure it's politically doable, but you may want to consider some ideas around a student basic income, which would not be tied up with student loans, but more or less be sort of a kind of a income guarantee to students if they fall below a certain income level. So I would say that could be an idea, but I think there will be headwinds on this proposal for many political and substantive reasons. What have you heard, Stephanie, from others about this question that you have posed to me? Let me turn it back to you. What are you thinking of?
Yeah, I feel like one of the major challenges, I guess, is this sort of normalization that to be a student, you're basically scraping by, that you shouldn't be engaging in any luxuries like avocado toast or whatnot. But that's honestly not what a lot of us are asking for. Some of us get support from sort of our parents and guardians, and that's great, but others of us don't. And this kind of assumption that like it's part of student life to, just eat ramen all the time or, live in unsafe and sort of dangerous housing. It's created a lot of challenges because there's this perception that, well, that's part of it. And, you're not entitled to more, which I would personally call into question. I was wondering, I guess, if we could get your thoughts on like how to speak to politicians and decision makers and kind of, I guess, reinstate our ability to have like a quality life.
I think you make a very good case, and I would make exactly that case. I would contextualize it within the cost of living and the situation you are describing. A diet of ramen is not healthy for anyone, and I would advise you not to eat ramen every day. I know that's hard. But so what do you do? What do you eat? And those are the kinds of questions that make people sit up and think. But I wonder what your proposals are as well. I mean, I would advise you not just to describe a problem, but also to describe a solution. I actually don't have a solution for you right now outside, my proposal, a student basic income. That might help. But there are all kinds of hurdles to this. So, should student aid be increased? Should there be a larger forgiveness platform? Should there be loans for housing and food, or subsidies for housing and food? These are largely provincial matters as well. So, you'd have to figure that out. But I would suggest if that is a real concern for you, then you have to work it up in sort of a proposal with solutions, 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. And then people can, someone like me could say, that really sounds quite interesting.
Thank you very much. Yeah, no, this is very helpful, Senator. And in the interest of time, I will probably take it offline and have a conversation with you later about a policy proposal that Meal Exchange is proposing over the next couple of months, and we'll pick your brain on that. Thank you so much, Senator, for coming. I know it has been a tough day for you, but we are thinking of you. Thank you genuinely from our heart for taking time and having this conversation.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity, and good luck. And don't eat ramen. Don't eat ramen every day. That kind of horrifies me, I have to say. Good luck, all.
I'll tell my housemates that.
Thank you.
Good luck, all. Thank you so much.
Take care, Senator. Bye-bye.